So myself, I lived in Russia for more than 1 year. So I know Russia and I know the people. I also lived outside the capital and not in St. Petersburg as well. So I was really immersed. And so yeah, the thing is like the life in Russia and Russia, how it is depicted in these outlets are two things that do not match each other at all, right? So it is a very idealized image of Russia. It is an image of Russia that doesn't talk about the big problems, big social problems that are in Russia. So, for example, really low salaries, people who cannot make the ends meet, which is like very, very common. So all these things are not talked about. Also, the fact that, okay, it is true that in Russia there is a more conservative mentality, right? If compared to, let's say, Western Europe, that's true. But on the other hand, the divorces are the percentages of divorces are really high, especially because people are encouraged to get married as soon as possible, right? So you have like really high percentages of divorces, and this really doesn't fit that image of Russia, as a kind of the Holy Christian Empire. And yeah, so yeah, there is a really like the image of Russia that there is nothing else like the real Russian.
Hello, you're listening and watching Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. And I'm very excited because today we're going to speak about a topic that people in Russian actually discuss quite a bit, but a topic that really doesn't make it out of Russian language very much. And I'm really glad that we'll be able to at least, kind of have this conversation today. And I'm very excited that we're here to discuss an article by Jessica Valisa, and who's joining us from New Zealand. Jessica, welcome to the program, first of all. I'm very excited because New Zealand is awesome.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Yuri. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm also really excited. And yeah, it's a nice spring day in New Zealand right now. It's early in the morning, 9:30 a.m.
Fantastic. And it's fall here, and it's 4:30 in the afternoon in Wisconsin in the United States. Yeah. Hello, future. The article is called Third Rome. Will Russia save Europe from itself? And it kind of seems like, what are we talking about here? And I think that we're really observing a fascinating process where in this formerly known as bipolar world, we have one superpower, and then what is Russia offering after communism? What alternative vision can it offer? And you are really going into describing what is this really vision that Kremlin is now promoting, and I was really excited to read it. So if you could just go ahead and explain why you thought this was a good topic.
So yeah, this is connected to my PhD research. I'm looking at pro-Russian narratives in the Italian kind of alternative media spheres and social media. So this was one of the discourses which were coming up quite a lot, at least in some of the outlets that I am analyzing. So like to just give you an example, some of the outlets are kind of independent, more or less far-right blogs or news portals. Some others are connected, clearly connected to Russia, for example, the Italian version of Sputnik News. And this is one very interesting narrative that I observed, like in a lot of different articles, this fact that, Russia represents kind of the lost Europe, and that Russia has a role in saving the West from its downfall, right? So this is a kind of narrative that resonates a lot with like a lot of far-right ideas. And it is a narrative that emerges in this data that I have been analyzing. So I thought it might be interesting to write a bit about that.
Can you explain why Russia sees us? And when we say Russia, this is something that always has to be like a disclaimer. When we say Russia, we don't mean Russian people. We mean really Kremlin, the organization, the people that run the show. So when we talk about Russia in this sense as an international player, perhaps, What do you mean by third Rome?
Right, so there is this idea of Russia as the third Rome, as the country which still abides by the Christian values. So the first Rome was, of course, Rome, which adopted Christianity, but then Rome fell because, you know, the various problems, the barbarian invasions. And then the Eastern Roman Empire is the one that kind of bear the flag of Christianity after that. And it's like Constantinople. Which also, that's the second Rome, right? That also fell because of the Ottoman Empire. And since then, the third Rome is Russia, because as you all know, I guess, Russia is a Christian Orthodox country, so which took this kind of Christianity that was there in Constantinople. Also, I think I don't remember very well about it, but I think it was like in the 15th century that one of the Russian czars married the daughter of the emperor of Constantinople. I think her name was Sophia. So there is like this idea coming up of Russia is that country that still has this kind of Christian values around which the Roman Empire and then the Eastern Roman Empire revolved around. And okay, and this, you know, it doesn't sound like much, some kind of historical narrative. But the problem is that this kind of historical narrative is used nowadays to, for once, to kind of define a certain idea of Russia as a traditional country which is upholding Christian values. So, and this is used against Europe and the West, which they think they have like strayed away from these great values and culture to embrace the so-called modern culture or postmodern culture, depending on who's writing this, which is based on like rejection of religion and acceptance of, for example, homosexuals, gender equality, which is all things that Russia supposedly stands against, right?
Well, but that's, you know, that's such a disconnect from what Russian people are actually like, or life in Russia is like. And yet that's the ideology that is being sold to the rest of the world. But yet it also fits in with this messianic vision that the leadership of Kremlin has for its own role. And for my part, looking at this from kind of political democratic point of view, I go, you know, if government doesn't change, after a while, it starts to kind of get really funky. And here I'm seeing this as this kind of like growth into messianic vision of special mission to this world that is coming from Kremlin via this approach. You know, how do you see that developing? Does that, I don't know, take part in your research?
Right. So yeah, the messianic narrative, I think it's really important when you study and think about Russia, because, you know, also at the time when Russia was the Soviet Union and was upholding this idea of communism, and it was like at the forefront of, you know, the communism that one day should have embraced the whole world, right, according like to Marxist ideology. So there is still that. There are other kind of messianic narratives before that, also connected to the role of Christianity. You know, because like Christianity is has a kind of messianic meaning. So at the end there is this idea that at the end of the world there will be this battle between Christians against the Antichrist, right, before the second coming of Christ. So now I'm not an expert of religion, so my knowledge about this is kind of it's like a bit superficial. So just I apologize if I say anything that is wrong, but this is what I got, right? So taking this narrative, you know, someone who is going to oppose the Antichrist at the very end of the world, and putting Russia inside this narrative. As like some of the articles that I read, they say, you see, this is already happening. Russia is already the main subject which is battling against the forces of the Antichrist, which are embodied in this kind of, let's say, postmodern culture that I already mentioned. And this has quite an impact on people who are religious, not all religious people, of course, but like some sectors of, let's say, more extreme Christians and also Catholics, they see a kind of congruence between what they think and what these kind of ideas, right?
Jessica, the next thing that I think is of concern here in your amazing article in Fair Observer that I recommend everybody go and read right now is apparently QAnon also uses this imagery of not necessarily third Rome, but at least second Rome by referencing Byzantine. Where do you see that coming from? What does it tell you as a researcher when you look at that?
Okay, yeah, so it's pretty difficult to look into QAnon because, it's something new and still researchers are kind of trying to understand what is at stake there. But yeah, so in my article, I just referenced to another article, I think it's like by an American historian, which noted the use of these Byzantine symbols in QAnon rhetoric, and also I think in some other sectors of the American far right. And so yeah, this is like not the same as the references to Russia. It's like these are references to the, as you say, the so-called second Rome. But what is interesting here is the kind of the same kind of discourse that you can see kind of half hidden there, right? This idea of an empire, of a political entity which is characterized by Christian values. As you can more or less kind of define the Byzantines, even though, of course, these are all negatives, right? There's not much to do with how things really work there. It's kind of a political negative, a political symbol. And this political symbol of, the empire, which stands for Christianity, is kind of counterimposed to what they see as like the current state of things, which are characterized by these, as I say, postmodern culture, lack of values, all also these ideas that are also in QAnon of, the main leaders being pedophiles, being Satanists. So that is a really powerful symbol that you can use if you know how to read it, to kind of define this alternative. And what can I tell you? I mean, I don't know too much about QAnon myself, but looking at my data, I can almost safely tell that like a lot of people who embrace conspiracy views and they have this kind of idea of the corrupted modern world, they see in Russia as a entity, as a political entity, and in the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, as a political and moral alternative to the present state of chaos, even though, this is also a political narrative and doesn't say a lot about other things that are happening in Russia.
All right. Do we know anything about people who are interested in that kind of ideology worldwide? Do they have anything in common? And have they ever talked to actual Russian people? Because it seems like the disconnect between the ideology being sold and the life being lived it's such a huge chasm that there has to be at some point some kind of realization that maybe it's not adding up. But who are these people,
Right. So what can I tell you? So I am analyzing mostly Italian far-right sites. So that would be a bit of a long discussion, but I will just say a few things. So some of these people come from a kind of earlier tradition of far-right thought, also kind of higher than, let's say, the conspiracy tropes. And so, for example, some of them embraced the thought of Julius Evola, which was like a philosopher, not really organic to the fascist regime, but he lived through that experience, and he lived through the experience of the fascist republic in northern Italy, which was a collaborationist state. So he was a fascist thinker. And this fascist thinker, it was then rediscovered in Russia in the early, I think in the 80s by Alexander Dukin. And so he started to write about Evola and using Evolian concepts to talk about his stuff. And this has had a good reception among the Italian far right. So there are all these connections that are there. So yeah, I would say that in Italy, a lot of these people, they belong to the far right, even the more, let's say, not populist, moderate, so a lot of supporters of Matteo Salvini, for example, they have a pretty good view of Russia. He had that, then there was a scandal and he's not talking about that anymore, but he was seen, I think, more than once with t-shirts of Vladimir Putin. So it's also on the more, this is a major party, by the way. I'm not talking about some groupuscules of the far right. Then also like smaller parties, they have a pretty good image of Russia, both the more, let's say, far-right parties, which are small parties in Italy, Forza Nova and Casa Pound, they have in their programs the fact that Italy should collaborate with Russia, among other things that like support Vladimir Putin and the Russian government, because of this idea also that I told you about, like it's kind of political and moral alternative. Worldwide, I would say,
Jessica.
Yeah. Yes.
These are Italians we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Aren't they all Catholic?
Yeah, that's it. You touch upon a good point. So we all know that Orthodox and Catholic, they kind of don't like each other because a long time ago they disagreed on like liturgy and other things. But some sector of the Catholics, by the way, not all these people that I'm talking about are Catholics. There are also some which are not religious.
I don't think it matters to Russians. I don't think it matters to Russians, but I would think to Italian Catholics, this would be a deal.
Indeed. But the thing is that among the most conservative of the Catholics, they reject everything that happened after the Second Vatican Council in the 1970s, which was like a big reform of the Catholic faith. The fact that you don't speak Latin anymore when you have the Holy Mass and other things that kind of reform the Catholic faith to make it more modern. But they like Orthodoxy because Orthodoxy never changed through the centuries. It is still the same. It has been the same for a long time. And they see in that a kind of inspiration. And then in Italy, there is a whole movement of people, like, as I told you, rejecting these reforms and doing the Mass in the old way. And this is also connected to this kind of positive perception of the Orthodox faith as, you know, a Christian faith that never kind of wavered and never kind of succumbed to modernity, right? So yeah, that's one thing.
So it seems like fascism brings people together of different faiths. They find common language through fascism. That you know, whether Italian fascists or Russian fascists, it's that common. That's the commonality. They can overcome religious differences. That's encouraged.
Yes. Yeah, it's a vision of the world. It's not. It can be religious and can be less religious, but that kind of vision of the world. And so now, briefly, I also wanted to comment about what, as you said, the discrepancy between the official narrative and what happens in Russia. Right. So myself, I lived in Russia for more than 1 year. So I know Russia and I know the people. I also lived outside the capital and not in St. Petersburg as well. So I was really immersed. And so, yeah, the thing is like the life in Russia and Russia, how it is depicted in these outlets are two things that do not match each other at all, right? So it is a very idealized image of Russia. It is an image of Russia that doesn't talk about the big problems, big social problems that are in Russia. So, for example, you know, really low salaries, people who cannot make the ends meet, which is like very, very common. So all these things are not talked about. Also the fact that, okay, it is true that in Russia there is a more conservative mentality, right? If compared to, let's say, Western Europe, that's true. But on the other hand, the divorces, like the percentages of divorces are really high. especially because people are encouraged to get married as soon as possible, right? So you have like really high percentages of divorces, and this really doesn't fit that image of Russia, as a kind of the holy Christian empire. And yeah, so yeah, there is a really like the image of Russia that they have is nothing else like the real Russia, and also people like more or less common people, they don't hold this extremist view. They are proud of their country, right? They think their country should have an important position in the world, but very, very rarely I encountered such views, to be fair.
Right. Well, and for the Westerner, I think it's a clash, because it's nice to be proud of your country. That's great, but you also want to live well yourself. You're kind of used to it. So like, okay. And right. And of course, just to complete this picture, Russia also counters itself, tries to set itself as a opposition to Islam, and that influence on Europe. And that's where you kind of, your point, I guess, is that it's going to save Europe from itself. And I'm going, what are we talking about? Like Russia? They don't care about religion, so that explained, please.
Right. So yeah, the other thing that they often talk about, Russia as a multi-ethnic country. So I think that the biggest mosque in Europe is in Moscow, right? And there are regions which are a Muslim majority, those in the south with Chechnya and Dagestan, which were involved in the war. So like really difficult, also still difficult relations between Russians and people from these minorities. But for example, then you have Tatarstan, which is also kind of Muslim majority. But I say Muslim majority, but like a lot of people are not that religious in Russia, also because of the influence of the Soviet Union, right? So that region of Tatarstan is very evolved. Like Kazan is a really beautiful city and really modern, and especially if I compare it with a lot of other places I saw in Russia, right? Then you have like a lot of other minorities, like you have Buddhists, you have like different churches, different Christian denominations. You have animists, you have whatever you want in Russia, because it's such a huge country. So it is impossible, that only one religion was there. And also among the people who think themselves as Orthodox, they just maybe go to the church, a lot of them. Let's maybe go to the church a couple of times per year because of, Easter celebration or Christmas celebration, and that's it. But this idea of Christian Russian can be really employed also in Europe, because as I say, there is the narrative. The Second Rome was defeated by the Muslims, right, because of the invasion of Constantinople. So there is like this idea, like Russia is still keeping Christianity and will not be defeated by Muslims, which is something that appeals more kind of Islamophobic people in Europe. And also in very interesting, they in some of these narratives, I can see there is a coupling between these postmodern culture, tolerant culture, multiculturalism, that is and Islam, which is weird, right? And radical Islam, because they think, like some people think that the Muslims are kind of using this as a proxy to kind of occupy the West, right? And then in contrast, Russia stays like an example of country which really upholds religious values, which it does to a certain extent, but I think it is just for show.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, in that point about Moscow having the biggest mosque in Europe, I think is just really worth mentioning twice, because it seems like there's such a disconnect between supporters of these ideas that they don't like talk to each other and don't so on one hand, I would welcome more of supporters of this kind of ideology and this narrative to travel to Russia.
Yeah, I don't know how many of them were there. I think a few were really, but most of them like never went to Russia and just talk like, as like they just talk about things that they didn't really experience themselves, so they don't really know. They really know in a deep way, let's say. And yes, so also the thing that, Russian is kind of a difficult language and there is a language barrier. So if you consume this kind of media, you cannot, you don't have the access, to other voices. Even because like a lot of things that happen in Russia are not talked about in the West, like a lot of social problems and things like it's like there are not a lot of articles around that, but if you live there and you know the experience of other people, you know that, right? But yeah, it is, as I really agree with you, it is really kind of fantasy, I would almost call it, about Russia. It's not much to do with life there.
But it almost seems like it's a religion created by a propaganda machine. It's smoke and mirrors. It doesn't exist, but it's a pretty consistent ideology at the same time that you're describing. And thank you for laying it out. And I think more attention should be paid to this. But what a weird disconnect. We see this in the United States, I think, on the Russian diaspora side, because we have a lot of people here who's, originally from Soviet Union, Russia, who are strong Trump supporters. And these people who are from Russia, they're usually Jewish. And so like Jews in America don't really support Donald Trump, but Russian Jews do. And in fact, they show a lot of like really strong signs of some racist behavior pretty often as a community. And then when you explain to them that, other supporters of this person really hold you in very low regard because you're Jewish, they don't like you. And they should talk to each other too. And I think that those two people should communicate. So the groups should communicate and understand, why do they support each other? Maybe that hatred brings them together. I don't know. But wow, what an interesting topic you dig. Is this going to be, so this is your topic of your PhD?
Yeah, this is part of the topic of my PhD.
Fascinating. Looking forward to looking forward to your career now. Like
Thanks.
What university? Where would you like to be? A professor somewhere or researcher? How does that work?
Yeah, I'd like to continue with research, maybe with a postdoc after I'm done here. But we will see what the perspectives are, because COVID kind of messed up a lot of opportunities as well. So I was supposed to go to Russia for my research. I never got there because of COVID. So.
Is there a market for Russian academics, for researchers in the field?
Yeah, in especially I would say in Europe. So probably that's where I'm heading to after this. There are several people which are observing this, and even outside of academia, there are think tanks that are kind of monitoring what happens in this sphere.
Very interesting. Well, best of luck to you. Thank you so much for
Thank you so much.
time. It's been great talking to you.